The rain fell on the market of Kajiado, a hard, dusty rain that turned the earth to mud and sent people scrambling for cover. Under the awning of his textile stall, Chuma, 50s, a man with threads of silver in his hair and a face etched with quiet loneliness, watched the chaos. His clothes were of good quality, his stall prosperous, but his eyes held a deep emptiness. Across the muddy path, a young girl, Ada 8, shivered violently. Her dress was a thin, faded rag plastered to her skin by the downpour. She was trying to scoop rainwater from a grimy puddle into a small, cracked pot. Her small hands were numb with cold. Villagers rushed past her, their own burdens heavy, their eyes sliding away from her plight. Chuma's fingers closed around the last coin in his leather purse. It was a small amount, but it was for his evening meal. He watched the girl, his comfortable life feeling suddenly hollow against her raw struggle. Chuma's internal war was a silent storm. That coin is for my supper. She is not my responsibility. But as he watched Ada's small frame tremble, a memory, sharp and painful, flashed in his mind. His own daughter, taken by a fever years ago, would have been about this age. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the market, snatching ledger papers from his stall and sending them dancing into the muddy street. With a frustrated grunt, Chuma lunged to catch them. Ada, seeing the papers fluttering towards her, forgot her own misery. She scrambled after them, her small feet slipping in the mud. She managed to trap 2 sheets under her bare foot, carefully picking them up, though the mud smeared the ink. She held them out to him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Your papers, Bwana," she said, her voice a small whisper against the drumming rain. Chuma took the muddy papers, his eyes meeting hers. In that moment, the barrier between their two worlds, his of quiet wealth and hers of desperate poverty, seemed to thin. The sight of her, shivering yet holding his papers with such care, shattered his hesitation. Chuma's hand unclenched. He took her small, cold hand and pressed the single coin into her palm. "Here, child," he said, his voice softer than he had used in years. "Get yourself something warm." Ada stared at the coin as if it were a fallen star. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, welled up with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. She didn't just say thank you. She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect learned from a life of hardship. "Asant Mz, thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As she clutched the coin and ran off, a strange warmth spread through Chuma's chest, a feeling so foreign it almost startled him. It was a flicker of connection, a tiny spark in the cold emptiness of his heart. Ada ran through the winding paths to a small, crumbling hut on the village outskirts. Inside, her mother, Maima 30s, weak from hunger, coughed quietly by a dead fire. Ada burst in, her face alight. "Mama, look," she cried, opening her palm to reveal the coin. Maima's first reaction was suspicion. "Ada, where did you get this? Did you steal?" "No, Mama, a kind man, a merchant at the market. He gave it to me for nothing." Maima took the coin, her weary eyes studying her daughter's radiant face. For the first time in weeks, she saw a spark of pure, unburdened hope. That single act of kindness was more than currency. It was a message that they were not invisible, not entirely forgotten. Chuma packed his stall, the rain easing to a drizzle. He heard the whispers. Chuma gave his last coin to that poor child. He shrugged them off, the warmth he'd felt already being replaced by the familiar, practiced solitude of his walk home. Meanwhile, Ada sat with her mother, sharing a small, warm bowl of porridge bought with the coin. The simple food tasted like a feast. "I will never forget him, Mama," Ada said, her voice firm with a determination beyond her years. "Someday, when I am able, I will find a way to thank him properly." She made the promise to the fading light of the day, a secret vow sealed by the memory of a stranger's kindness in the rain. An invisible chain of fate had been forged. 15 years was a long time, enough for a man to build an empire, and for a child to become a woman. The dusty village of Kajiado was a faded photograph in Chuma's memory, replaced by the vibrant, chaotic port city of Mombasa. His office was a testament to his success. Wide mahogany desks, shelves groaning with leather-bound ledgers, and samples of the finest silks and cottons from across the continent draped over polished chairs. The air smelled of money, ink, and the distant, salty tang of the ocean. Chuma, now in his late 60s, was a figure of respect in the Merchants' Guild. His advice was sought, his handshake considered binding. Yet as he stood at his large window, watching the dhows with their white sails glide into the harbor, he felt a profound emptiness. The wealth he had accumulated was a fortress, but it was a fortress built around a hollow man. The laughter of children in the street below was a sound that pierced him, a constant reminder of the family he never had, the warmth his home lacked. He would often find himself tracing the path of a single raindrop on the glass, his mind drifting back to a storm-soaked market and a shivering girl whose name he never knew. That single memory of connection was a jewel he kept polished in the vast, empty treasury of his heart. It was the one transaction in his life that had yielded no financial profit, yet it was the only one that ever felt truly worthwhile. Unbeknownst to Chuma, his fortress had a silent guardian. From a smaller, meticulously organized office directly across the bustling street, a young woman observed his world. This was Ada, the girl from the rain. The years had been kind to her, forging a woman of sharp intelligence and quiet grace. Her own office was a reflection of her journey, modern, efficient, with a single, beautiful moss-beaded necklace hanging on the wall, a splash of her heritage in a world of commerce. She had not just escaped poverty, she had conquered it. Through a ferocious work ethic, a preternatural talent for logistics, and a genuine, disarming kindness that built unwavering loyalty, she had founded Nyota Traders, a modest but fiercely respected import agency. She knew the intricate details of Chuma's business, the ebb and flow of his fortunes, the quiet melancholy that clung to him like a shadow. And she was planning her masterpiece of gratitude. A complex, carefully orchestrated plan was already in motion, a safety net woven from favors, information, and strategic alliances, all designed to catch him should he ever fall. She was the unseen architect of his continued stability, her watchful eyes ensuring the man who had given her a coin would never want for anything. The calm of Chuma's professional life was shattered by a tempest of envy. Jabari, a rival merchant whose own fortunes had stagnated, saw Chuma's quiet dignity as arrogance and his success as a personal insult. The attack was launched not with swords but with whispers, a far more lethal weapon in the world of trade. Poisonous rumors, slick and insidious, began to circulate through the guild's coffee houses and meeting halls. Chuma's famed silks were cheap imitations from the East. His scales were doctored to cheat his clients. His business was a house of cards built on debt and deception. The lies, repeated by enough bought tongues, gained a vile credibility. Long-standing partners sent terse letters canceling contracts. The gregarious head of the spice traders now avoided his gaze. The final blow was a formal sealed summons from the Merchants' Council, demanding his presence to answer these grave allegations. Chuma stood holding the vellum paper, its official wax seal feeling like a brand of shame. The walls of his fortress, which he thought were so strong, were crumbling from the inside out, eroded by the acid of falsehood. Across the street, Ada saw him receive the summons. She saw his shoulders slump, the proud posture deflating. The sight ignited a cold, determined fury within her. The time for passive observation was over. The storm Jabari had brewed was about to meet a hurricane. A volcanic rage boiled within Chuma. He could feel it, a hot primal urge to destroy Jabari. He had the resources to fight back with equal venom. He could hire men to sabotage Jabari's warehouses, plant evidence of his own crimes, spread even more vicious rumors about his rival's personal life. The path of revenge was clear, well-trodden by men of business. He stood at that crossroads, his heart pounding a war drum in his chest. But then his fingers, clenched into white-knuckled fists, slowly relaxed. His gaze fell upon a small, worn leather pouch he kept in a drawer of his desk, a sentimental relic from his humbler days. It reminded him of the market, of the rain, of the last coin. That act of giving had not been a business decision. It had been a human one. It had cost him his supper but had given him a nourishment that had lasted 15 years. To now descend into the mud with Jabari would be to spit on the memory of that better man, to betray the one pure transaction of his life. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary resolve. He would not retaliate. He would walk into the lion's den of the council with only his ledgers, his integrity, and the faint, foolish hope that truth still held value. It was the most terrifying gamble of his life. As Chuma and his few loyal clerks worked tirelessly, assembling documents and preparing his testimony, an unseen force began to counteract Jabari's machinations. A ship's captain, handsomely paid by Jabari to claim he had never received Chuma's payment for a shipment, suddenly appeared before the council preemptively. He was sweating, confessing to the bribe and presenting the actual, signed receipt, mumbling about a visitor who had shown him the error of his ways. Crucial shipping manifests, which Jabari's agents had stolen from a clerk's office, were found neatly bundled and delivered anonymously to the head judge's home. Ada was the master weaver behind this tapestry of justice. She used her network not as a bludgeon, but as a scalpel. She called in favors from a dockmaster whose daughter she had employed, from a clerk whose mother's medical bills she had quietly paid. She leveraged information about Jabari's own shady dealings, using it not for blackmail, but to persuade key individuals to reconsider their allegiances. Every piece of salvation that floated Chuma's way was meticulously engineered to look like fortunate coincidence or the natural result of his own good reputation. She was repaying her debt, not with a single coin, but with a mountain of calculated effort, her silent gratitude the powerful, invisible current pulling him back from the brink. The council chamber was a cavernous hall of dark, polished wood, where shafts of sunlight cut through the dusty air like divine judgment. Chuma stood before the 12 elders, his weathered hands resting on his open ledger books. For a breathtaking moment, the tide seemed to be turning in his favor. The recanting witness, the miraculously reappeared shipping manifests, they painted a picture of a man wronged. Then his trusted lieutenant, Mohammed, a man whose children Chuma had held at their naming ceremonies, rose from his seat behind him. Mohammed's face, usually creased with a ready smile, was a stone mask. He could not meet Chuma's eyes. "The council should know," Mohammed began, his voice hollow, "that the Bwana Chuma you see is not the man he pretends to be. He keeps 2 sets of books." He held aloft a small, leather-bound journal. "This is his private record. It shows the true figures, the hidden profits, the planned deceptions with foreign traders." The forgery was exquisite, a masterpiece of betrayal, capturing the subtle flourishes of Chuma's handwriting with cruel precision. The gasp that echoed through the chamber was a physical force. Chuma felt his knees weaken. This was not a business dispute. This was a heart being ripped from his chest. The loneliness he had carried for years became absolute, a freezing void where trust had once lived. Jabari watched from the shadows, a faint, victorious smile playing on his lips. The serpent had struck, and its venom was spreading fast. A wave of condemning murmurs swept through the elders. The damning evidence of the journal presented by a man they all knew as Chuma's right hand seemed incontrovertible. The head elder, Mz Kibwe, a man with a face like a weathered cliff, was about to speak, his expression grim. "That journal is a lie crafted by the true deceiver in this room." The voice was clear, resonant, and unwavering. All heads turned. Ada stood at the great oak doors of the chamber, backlit by the sun, her form a silhouette of defiance. She walked forward, the click of her heels on the polished floor the only sound. She did not look at the elders but directly at the ashen-faced Mohammed. It was commissioned by Jabari for 5 pieces of silver and written by a forger named Simba, who drinks his sorrows away at the Red Lantern Tavern. Then she turned her gaze to Chuma. The elderly merchant stared, his mind reeling. There was a profound, haunting familiarity in the set of her eyes, the curve of her cheekbone, a ghost from a life he thought he'd left behind. "Who is this woman who interrupts these proceedings?" Mz Kibwe demanded, his voice thunderous. Ada's voice softened, her eyes still locked with Chuma's. "I am the shivering girl in the Kajiado market. I am the one you gave your last coin to." The air left Chuma's lungs. The past did not just whisper. It had walked into the room, a fully formed savior, and the world tilted on its axis. For a moment there was a stunned, reverent silence as the elders processed this revelation. But Jabari was a cornered animal, and he fought with vicious desperation. He sprang to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Ada and Chuma. "Do you see?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is proof of their conspiracy. This street urchin he groomed. Their connection is not coincidence, it is collusion. They have been plotting this for years, building a false narrative of kindness to cover their greed." He produced more papers, hastily forged letters that spoke of a secret partnership, of plans to discredit honest merchants like himself. He wove a tapestry of such sordid deceit that some of the elders, their minds clouded by the complexity of the accusations, began to nod in uncertainty. Chuma looked from Jabari's twisted face to Ada's calm one, a new horror dawning. Had his impulsive kindness all those years ago somehow become a weapon to be used against her? Had he, in his ignorance, drawn a target on this remarkable woman's back? The beautiful, simple story of gratitude was being shredded, replaced by a narrative of corruption that threatened to destroy them both. The path to redemption seemed to vanish, swallowed by a quicksand of clever lies. As the chamber erupted into arguments and confusion, Ada remained an island of calm. She waited, her patience a stark contrast to Jabari's frantic energy. When the noise subsided slightly, she spoke, her voice a blade of pure, cold reason. "The forger, Simba, he is outside. He would rather confess his crime to this council than face the men Jabari hired to ensure his silence." She gave a slight nod to her associate at the door. The forger, a gaunt, terrified man, was led in. He immediately fell to his knees, pointing a shaking finger at Jabari. "He paid me. He gave me a sample of the merchant's writing and told me what to put in the book. And the letters, too. He said he would have my hands broken if I spoke a word." The dam of lies broke. Then Ada presented her final, unassailable evidence. A formal analysis from Master Eli, the city's most renowned and neutral calligrapher, which meticulously detailed 12 distinct discrepancies between the forgeries and Chuma's genuine script. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion. It was a matter of fact, documented and undeniable. Jabari's face collapsed, all arrogance draining away to reveal the terrified man beneath. Mohammed buried his face in his hands, his body racked with silent sobs. Justice, which had been blinded, now saw with perfect, piercing clarity. In the profound silence that settled after the storm, Chuma could only stare at Ada. The grand chamber, the assembled elders, the disgraced Jabari, it all melted into an indistinct blur. All that was in focus was her. The memory of the coin, a small, cold disk in his palm, transformed in his mind. It was no longer just a symbol of a forgotten kindness. It had been a seed. A seed planted in the mud of a rainy market, watered by time and nurtured by a grateful heart, had grown into this mighty, sheltering tree that had just saved him from ruin. The hollow emptiness that had been his constant companion for decades was suddenly, and completely, filled to overflowing. It was filled with an awe so powerful it was almost painful. He had spent a lifetime meticulously adding columns of figures, believing wealth was something to be accumulated in a ledger. He now understood with breathtaking certainty that true wealth was something you planted, often without ever seeing it grow. The ledger of the soul operated on a different, more profound mathematics, where a single, selfless coin could yield an immeasurable, lifelong dividend of loyalty and grace. The council chamber, once a place of judgment, now became a theater of justice. Mz Kibwe, his voice resonating with newfound authority, declared Chuma fully exonerated. Jabari and Mohammed were stripped of their merchant status and handed over to the city guards to face charges of fraud and defamation. As the disgraced men were led away, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The elders offered Chuma solemn nods of respect, their earlier suspicion replaced by admiration for the man who had quietly inspired such fierce loyalty. But Chuma had eyes only for Ada. He approached her, his step slow, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and profound humility. "You have saved more than my business today," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have saved my name, my honor, a debt I can never repay." Ada shook her head, a gentle smile touching her lips. "There is no debt, MZ. There is only a circle, but I must ask for your forgiveness." Chuma looked puzzled. "For what, child?" "For the years of watching you from the shadows," she explained. "For orchestrating help without your knowledge. It was a deception, however well-intentioned. I feared that if you knew, you might reject the aid or that it would tarnish the purity of the memory I held so dear." Her honesty was as disarming as her courage. News of the dramatic council hearing spread through Mombasa like a wildfire. By evening, the space outside Chuma's trading house was filled with people, not just his employees but fellow merchants, former skeptics and members of the community who had heard the incredible tale of the coin and the girl. It was not a riot, but a celebration. Drums appeared, and the rhythmic beat filled the air, a sound of victory and restored harmony. A group of women from the local cooperative, whom Ada had often supported, began to sing a traditional song of praise, their voices harmonizing beautifully against the urban night. Chuma and Ada stood on the steps, bathed in the warm glow of lantern light. They were presented with beautifully woven kente cloths, symbols of honor and nobility. In that moment, they were no longer just merchant and benefactor. They were living proof of a moral truth that resonated deeply with everyone present. The restoration was not just of Chuma's reputation, but of the community's faith in the power of goodness. The city, often cold and transactional, had been warmed by a story from a dusty village. A week later, they found themselves not in Mombasa, but back in Kajiado, standing on a small hill overlooking the very market where their story began. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the familiar dust. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the weight and wonder of their shared history. "I spent a lifetime building walls around myself," Chuma reflected, his gaze sweeping over the quieting village. "I thought strength was in solitude, that wealth was a fortress. I was a fool. The strongest thing I ever built was a bridge I never knew existed, with a single coin as its foundation." Ada listened, her own heart full. "And I spent years building my life on the foundation of that coin," she said. "It was my proof that the world was not entirely harsh, that a single act of grace could change a life's course. I built my business, my character, on the desire to be worthy of that grace." The wind, carrying the scent of rain and earth, whispered around them, connecting past to present, a silent witness to the completion of a sacred circle. Ada led Chuma to the small but now well-kept hut on the edge of the village. The crumbling walls had been repaired, and a healthy vegetable garden grew where once there was only dust. Inside, Mama, older now but with a light in her eyes that had replaced the weary despair, waited for them. When she saw Chuma, she did not bow or offer formal thanks. Instead, she took his hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "You gave a coin to a child," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But you gave a mother hope. You gave her a reason to believe that her daughter could be more than hunger and want. You did not just feed us for a day. You showed us a path for a lifetime." She embraced him, a simple, human gesture that held more meaning than any merchant's contract. For Chuma, who had known so little physical affection in his adult life, it was a profound moment of belonging. He saw the direct, human impact of his long-ago decision, not in ledgers or reputations, but in the warm, solid presence of a mother whose child had thrived. Inspired, Chuma did not simply return to his business in Mombasa. He used his resources, now combined with a new, profound purpose, to transform the village. In consultation with the elders, he funded the construction of a new, deep-bore well, ensuring no child would ever have to drink from a muddy puddle again. Next to it, a small, sturdy schoolhouse began to rise, its walls built from local stone. Ada, with her expertise in logistics and community organization, managed the projects, ensuring they served the people's true needs. The Chuma and Ada Learning Center, as it was named, became a symbol of a new kind of wealth, one that was invested, not hoarded. The villagers, once indifferent to the lonely merchant, now greeted him with genuine warmth. He was no longer a stranger looking in, but a part of the community, a respected elder who had poured his fortune back into the soil from which it had ultimately grown. The landscape itself began to change, reflecting the inner transformation of the man who had once only known how to take from it. The harmony of the village was shattered one night by a fury the elders had not seen in a generation. The skies opened, not with a gentle rain, but with a torrential, unrelenting downpour that turned the dry riverbed into a roaring brown monster. The river swelled, bursting its banks and clawing at the edges of Kajiado. The new schoolhouse, built on stable high ground, became a sanctuary, but the old, lower sections of the village were swiftly submerged. Panicked cries filled the air as families scrambled to higher ground, their belongings swept away in the churning water. Chuma and Ada, working in perfect, unspoken sync, became pillars of command. Chuma used his authority to organize the men into chains, passing sandbags and rescuing the elderly trapped in their homes. Ada, with her intimate knowledge of the village's families, directed the women and children to safety, her calm voice a steady anchor in the chaos. The disaster was a terrible test, but it proved the strength of the new foundation they had built, not of brick and mortar, but of trust and collective spirit. In the muddy, waterlogged aftermath, as the community gathered to assess the damage, a solitary, sodden figure approached Chuma and Ada. It was Jabari. Stripped of his fine clothes and merchant status, he was a broken man, his eyes hollow with shame and exhaustion. He had lost everything in the city, his name synonymous with treachery. He had come to the village, the origin of the story that destroyed him, as a last, desperate refuge. "I have no right to ask," he began, his voice a ragged whisper, his gaze fixed on the mud. "I came here with hatred in my heart, but I see now, I see what I tried to destroy." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to help, to carry stones, to dig mud, to do one honest thing." Chuma and Ada exchanged a long, silent look. The easy path was to turn him away, to let him drown in the consequences of his own making. But the harder, truer path was the one they had chosen to walk. Ada gave a slight nod. "The work is hard and no one will thank you for it," Chuma said. Jabari simply bowed his head, the gesture itself a world of gratitude. Justice had found its final, most potent form, not in punishment, but in the opportunity for redemption through humble labor. Weeks later, with the village largely restored, Ada found Chuma sitting by the new, functioning well. The morning sun was warm on their faces. She sat beside him and pressed a small, cool object into his palm. He looked down. It was a coin, but it was not the shilling he had given her all those years ago. This one was larger, handcrafted from polished brass, and around its edge were etched the words, "A single kindness builds a future." "I had this made," she said softly, "so you would always remember that your greatest legacy was not your wealth, but your heart." Chuma closed his fingers around the token, his throat tight. The circle was now physically, tangibly complete. The cold, spent coin of the past had been transformed into a warm, permanent symbol of a shared future. It was infinitely more valuable than any currency he had ever handled. He looked from the token in his hand to the thriving village around him, the school, the well, the people whose lives were now interwoven with his own. He had come to Kajiado a rich man and left a pauper. Now he had returned and become truly wealthy beyond any calculation. The harvest festival that year was a celebration unlike any other. The air, once heavy with dust, was now rich with the scent of roasting maize and stew. The entire village, along with many from the city who had heard the legendary tale, gathered on the cleared fields. The drums were louder, the dances more joyful, the colors of the traditional garments more vibrant against the green, recovered landscape. Chuma, wearing a simple but fine tunic, and Ada, radiant in a dress of deep blue, were led to the center of the circle. They were not asked to speak, but to dance. And as they moved to the rhythm of the drums, a slow, graceful dance of honor between generations, the community cheered and sang around them. It was a dance of gratitude, of resilience, of a moral order restored. The story of the coin and the girl was no longer just a story. It was the beating heart of the community, a living folktale danced into existence under the vast, starlit African sky, ensuring it would be passed down for generations to come. As the fires burned low and the children slept in their mothers' laps, an elder, the village griot, stood. His voice, though aged, carried the weight of history and the warmth of the fire. "Let this be a story told to our children, and our children's children," he began, his eyes sweeping over the faces of Chuma and Ada. "Wealth is not what you keep in your strongbox, but what you sow in the hearts of others. A life lived for oneself is a small, quiet story. A life lived for others becomes an epic that echoes through time." He paused, letting the silence hold them all. "The river may rage and enemies may scheme, but a single act of true compassion is an unbreakable seed. It may sleep in the winter of hardship, but it will always awake in the spring of hope, and its roots will hold a community fast against any storm. This is the truest wealth. This is our story." And in the quiet that followed, filled only with the crackle of embers and the contented sighs of a people at peace, the moral settled deep into every soul, that the smallest coin, given with a full heart, can build a fortune that lasts forever. The tale of Chuma and Ada did not end with the festival's final drumbeat, nor did it fade with the cooling embers of the celebration's fire. Instead, it wove itself into the very fabric of the land, becoming a new breath in the ancient wind that whispered through the acacia trees. In the years that followed, the Chuma and Ada Learning Center did more than teach children to read and write numbers. Its walls echoed with the story of the coin, a living lesson in the mathematics of the heart, where subtraction could become the greatest multiplication. The students learned that a community's true balance sheet was measured not in cattle or currency, but in the strength of its bonds and the depth of its compassion. Jabari, whose hands had once crafted forgeries, now blistered from the honest work of maintaining the village's new irrigation channels. He never became a leader, but he earned the quiet, respectful nod of his neighbors, a currency he had once scorned but now valued above all. He found a peace in his humble labor that his former wealth had never afforded him, a testament to the story's power to redeem even the most fractured of spirits. Maima, her back a little more bent but her smile ever brighter, would often sit at the new well, telling the young mothers who gathered there how a single day of rain had brought two storms, one that had threatened to wash everything away, and one that had washed everything clean, leaving a future rich with possibility. Chuma and Ada, bound by a thread spun from a moment of pity and woven into a tapestry of mutual salvation, continued their work. He, with the wisdom of age and the patience of a man who had finally found his purpose. She, with the fierce energy of one who knew that a single act could ignite a lifetime of change. They were family, not by blood, but by something more enduring, by choice, by history, and by a shared belief that the world could be mended, one kindness at a time. And so, if you ever find yourself in that region, and you feel a warm, dry wind carrying the scent of rich soil and blooming jasmine, listen closely. Beneath the chatter of the market and the laughter of children from the schoolyard, you might just hear the echo of a story. It is the story of a coin that was never truly spent, but invested in the most fertile ground of all, the human spirit. It is a reminder that our lives are not defined by the wealth we accumulate in our hands, but by the legacy we plant in the hearts of others. For a harvest sown with compassion never truly ends. It simply sends its seeds upon the wind forever.